I bought the island 3 weeks before everything fell apart. Funny how that worked out. Not funny, haha, funny like the universe has a sick sense of timing. It was supposed to be my escape from corporate bullshit, from the noise, from Karen in accounting who microwaved fish every goddamn Thursday. 2 acres of rock and pine trees in the middle of Lake Wenatchee, 40 minutes by boat from the nearest town. The realtor called it rustic. I called it perfect. The cabin was small, 1 room really, with a loft for sleeping and a wood stove that looked older than my grandparents'. Solar panels on the roof, barely functional. A dock that sagged into the water like it was tired of standing. I'd planned to fix it up over the summer, spend weekends learning to be self-sufficient, maybe grow a beard and pretend I was Thoreau or some shit. Then the news started. First, it was just weird stories out of Portland. Riots, they said, drug-fueled violence, the usual urban decay narrative that people in suburbs love to clutch their pearls over. But then Seattle, then Spokane, then the news anchors stopped showing up for work, and the emergency broadcast system started its endless loop of instructions nobody could follow. Stay indoors. Avoid contact with infected individuals. Help is coming. Help wasn't coming. I was at my apartment in the city when I saw my first one, Mrs. Chen from 4B. She'd always been nice, always smiled when we passed in the hallway, always had her little terrier on a rhinestone leash. The terrier was gone. Mrs. Chen was in the parking lot, bent over something that used to be the maintenance guy, and the sounds she made weren't human anymore. Her jaw moved wrong, dislocated or broken, and there was so much blood it looked black in the evening light. I didn't pack much. Grabbed my camping gear, the emergency supplies I'd bought for the island, every can of food in my cupboards, and my dad's old hunting rifle with maybe 30 rounds. Threw it all in my truck and drove north while the radio dissolved into static and screaming. The marina was chaos. People fighting over boats, someone shooting at shadows, a fire burning in the harbor master's office. I had my own boat, a 12-foot aluminum thing with an outboard motor I barely knew how to use, docked at the far end where the seasonal slips were. Cost me everything in my wallet and my watch to convince the kid guarding the fuel pumps to fill my tank and 3 extra canisters. The lake was black under the moonless sky. I couldn't see the island, but I knew the heading, had memorized it during my weekend visits. The motor sounded so loud, I was certain every infected thing for miles could hear it, but the water stayed empty behind me. Just darkness and the occasional light from the shore, flickering and dying as I pushed further out. I almost missed the island in the dark, would have, except the dock's solar light was still working, a weak yellow glow that looked like salvation. I cut the motor too early and drifted the last 100 feet, listening. The water lapped against the hull. Something splashed in the distance, fish or beaver or worse. The trees on the island were darker shapes against a dark sky, and for a moment I thought about just staying in the boat, floating until morning. But the mainland was burning. I could see the glow behind the mountains, could smell smoke on the wind. I tied up at the dock and carried my supplies up to the cabin in 3 trips, rifle slung over my shoulder, jumping at every sound. The cabin smelled like must and mouse droppings. I didn't turn on lights, just piled everything inside and barred the door with a 2x4 I'd bought to fix the porch. That first night, I sat in the dark with the rifle across my lap and listened to the world end. The radio picked up fragments. Emergency broadcasts cutting in and out. Someone crying. Gunshots that might have been gunshots or might have been static. A preacher praying in Spanish. Then nothing but white noise. I fell asleep just before dawn and woke to sunlight streaming through the grimy windows and the sound of birds. Normal birds. Chickadees and jays and the laugh of a loon out on the water. For about 30 seconds, I thought maybe I'd dreamed it all. Maybe I'd had some kind of breakdown and driven up here in a panic over nothing. Then, I looked across the water toward the mainland and saw the smoke. 3 columns, thick and black, rising into the clear morning sky. The town was burning. I grabbed the binoculars I'd bought for birdwatching. Jesus, birdwatching, like that mattered now, and scanned the shoreline. Movement, lots of it. Too far to see details, but I could make out figures on the beach, in the water, wandering along the road that circled the lake. They moved wrong, jerky and aimless, and then suddenly fast, darting after something I couldn't see. I watched for an hour, saw one catch a deer at the water's edge, saw others converge on it, saw the deer stop thrashing, watched them feed. My hands were shaking when I lowered the binoculars. The island was maybe half a mile from shore, maybe less at the narrow point to the south. Could they swim? The news hadn't said. The emergency broadcasts had covered bites and infection rates and shelter-in-place orders, but nobody had mentioned whether the infected could swim. I spent that first full day doing an inventory. The cabin was stocked with some basics: canned soup, crackers gone soft with humidity, 3 bottles of water, matches, firewood, a propane camp stove with 1 canister. I'd brought more, 2 weeks of food, maybe 3 if I rationed, another 5 gallons of water, the camping supplies, first aid kit, water purification tablets, fishing gear I didn't know how to use, a hatchet, a tarp, batteries, flashlight. My phone and laptop both useless without cell service or internet. The solar panels worked, but barely. Enough to charge a phone over a full sunny day, maybe run a light for a few hours. The wood stove would keep the place warm. There was a rainwater collection barrel outside, empty now, but functional. An outhouse behind the cabin, door hanging crooked, spiders everywhere. 2 acres of island. I walked the perimeter that afternoon, rifle in hand, checking every shadow. Pine trees mostly, some scrub brush, rocks down to the water. No beach, just a rocky shoreline that dropped off quick into deep water. The dock on the north side where I'd tied up. A fallen tree on the east side creating a natural breakwater. The south point was the closest to the mainland, narrow enough that I could almost imagine jumping it on a good day. No other people, no boats, no way off except the one I'd brought. I sat on the dock as the sun went down and watched the fires spread on the mainland. More smoke now, and when the wind shifted I could smell it, burning wood and plastic and things I didn't want to identify. No lights came on in the town, no headlights on the roads, just fires and smoke and the shapes moving between them. That night, I boiled water on the camp stove and ate soup straight from the can to save dishes. Rationing started now, I decided. 1 meal a day, maybe 2 if I could catch fish. Make everything last as long as possible because I had no idea when, if, it would be safe to go back. The radio picked up a station out of Canada. A woman's voice, calm and professional, reading a list of evacuation zones. Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal. Then the broadcast cut to static and didn't come back. I slept in the loft with the rifle and woke every hour to sounds that turned out to be nothing. Wind in the trees, water against the dock, and owl hunting. My own heartbeat loud in my ears. Day 3 I tried the fishing. I'd bought a rod and some lures and a book about lake fishing that I'd skimmed once. The book was still in my truck at the marina, 40 minutes away across water that might as well have been an ocean. I tied on a lure, silver spinner thing that looked vaguely fish-like, and cast off the dock. The line went nowhere near where I aimed. I tried again, and again. On the 4th cast, I hooked my own shirt. On the 5th, I got the lure stuck in a tree branch overhanging the water. It took 20 minutes to get it untangled. By then my hands hurt, and I was sweating despite the cool morning air. I cast again, watched the lure sink, reeled it in. Nothing. Did it again. Nothing. An hour passed, 2. The sun climbed and my shoulders burned where I'd forgotten sunscreen. My stomach cramped with hunger. I'd skipped breakfast to save food, and my hands blistered on the rod. Then, something hit. The rod bent, the line sang, and I was so surprised I almost dropped the whole setup in the water. I reeled, too fast, felt the fish fight, and then go limp as the hook pulled free. Fuck! My voice echoed across the water, too loud, and I froze, listened, watched the mainland through the binoculars. The figures were still there, still moving, but none of them seemed to react. Too far away, had to be too far away. I tried for another hour before giving up. Ate half a can of beans for lunch and promised myself I'd figure out the fishing before supplies ran out. That afternoon, I reinforced the cabin, nailed boards across the windows on the inside, leaving gaps to see out, stacked firewood against the door as a barricade, set up a system of string and cans around the perimeter of the clearing as an early warning. If something came onto the island, I'd hear it. The work felt good, purposeful. Gave me something to focus on besides the smoke and the sounds drifting across the water when the wind was right. Sounds that might have been human. Might have been. I found a notebook in the cabin, water-stained and full of someone else's poetry, bad poetry about nature and solitude and finding yourself. I ripped out the used pages and started keeping a log. Day, date, weather, supplies remaining. Observations made it feel like I had control, like this was temporary. Day 3, clear and warm. 2.5 weeks food remaining, fishing unsuccessful. Mainland activity continues, no boat seen, no aircraft, radio static only. The sun set red through the smoke. I ate a can of corn and drank a bottle of water and told myself tomorrow would be better. Day 4, I saw them swimming. I was checking the string perimeter in the morning, early, mist still rising off the water. Movement caught my eye on the south shore. I grabbed the binoculars and focused, 3 of them, maybe 4. In the water, moving toward the island with a clumsy doggy paddle that was somehow worse than if they'd been graceful. Their heads bobbed above the surface, mouths open, arms slapping at the water. They were slow. So slow. Maybe 300 yards out and barely making progress. But they were coming. I ran back to the cabin, grabbed the rifle, returned to the shore, watched through the scope. The lead one was maybe 200 yards away now. Close enough to see details I didn't want to see. Bloated face, skin gone gray-green, eyes filmed over white. It saw me. I don't know how, but it saw me. And its mouth opened wider, and it made a sound that carried across the water. Not a moan, more like a cough or a wheeze, wet and thick. The others heard it and changed direction, all heading for the south point now. I'd never shot at a person before, never shot at anything alive except beer cans and a stop sign once when I was drunk and stupid at 19. My hands shook so bad I had to rest the rifle on a tree branch to steady it, aimed at the lead swimmer. Center mass like they taught in the online safety course I'd taken before buying the gun. Squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked across the water. Missed. The swimmer kept coming. I chambered another round. Aimed. Fired. The splash was 3 feet to the left. Come on, come on, come on. Breathing too fast. Spots dancing in my vision. Aimed again. Fired. The swimmer's head snapped back, the body went limp and sank immediately, just gone beneath the surface like it had never been there. The other 3 kept coming. I picked them off one by one, took 9 rounds total. I missed more than I hit, but eventually they all went down. The last one made it within 50 yards of shore before I got a clean headshot. It sank just like the others, and then there was nothing but ripples spreading out across the still water. I sat down hard on the rocks, dropped the rifle, threw up the corn from last night's dinner. When I could breathe again, I reloaded the rifle and watched the shoreline for an hour. No more swimmers. The bodies didn't float back up, just gone down into the deep water of the lake, and I tried not to think about them down there in the dark. 21 rounds left. Had to make every shot count from now on. I spent the rest of the day improving the barricades, dragged dead trees and branches down to the south shore, created a kind of obstacle course in the shallow water. If more came swimming, they'd have to navigate it, slow them down, give me time to shoot. Except what happened when I ran out of bullets. That night I couldn't sleep. Kept seeing that bloated face breaking the surface, kept hearing the wet cough sound it made. Kept doing math in my head. 21 rounds. How many infected on the mainland? How many might try to swim? Odds of hitting every shot? How long until I had nothing but the hatchet and hope? The math didn't work out. Day 5, I caught a fish, not the way I'd planned. I was pissing off the north dock in the morning. The outhouse was disgusting, and I decided the lake was big enough to absorb it, when I saw them in the shallows. Perch, maybe. Small ones darting between the rocks. I grabbed the net I'd bought for no particular reason and waded in waist deep. The water was cold enough to hurt. I stood still, net ready, and waited. It took forever. My legs went numb. My teeth chattered. But finally one swam close enough and I scooped it up in a motion that was more luck than skill. The fish flopped in the net, silver and desperate. I carried it to shore and knelt there staring at it, this living thing I'd caught and now had to kill. And for a second I thought about throwing it back. Then my stomach cramped and I remembered the math and I found a rock and did what needed to be done. Cleaning it was a nightmare. I'd watch videos, but videos don't show how slippery they are, or how the smell gets into everything, or how your hands shake when you're cutting into something that was alive 5 minutes ago. I made a mess of it, wasted half the meat, but what I salvaged I cooked on a flat rock next to the fire pit outside the cabin. Best meal I'd ever had, smoky and charred and probably full of bones I'd missed, but I ate every scrap and licked my fingers after. 2 fish the next morning, 3 the day after that. I was getting better, faster. Started smoking some of the meat to preserve it, hanging strips on green branches over the fire. It probably wasn't safe by any FDA standard, but the FDA wasn't returning calls. Food situation, improving. Ammo situation, still fucked. Mental situation, questionable. Talked to myself more. Full conversations, arguments about the best way to stack firewood, or whether to use the solar power for light, or to keep the phone charged, even though it was useless. Sometimes I talked to my sister, told her about my day like she was sitting across the fire. She'd gotten out, I decided. She was in the mountains somewhere, Colorado maybe, with her husband and their son. They were fine. Had to be fine. Day 8, I saw the boat. Afternoon, sun high and hot, no breeze. I was on the dock trying to fix a board that had come loose when I heard the motor. Faint at first, then louder. I grabbed the rifle and the binoculars and scanned the lake, coming from the north. A fishing boat, bigger than mine, white with blue trim. 2 people visible, moving normally, not infected, jerky. The first living humans I'd seen in over a week. I waved, shouted, jumped up and down on the dock like an idiot. They saw me. The boat turned toward the island. My heart hammered against my ribs. Other people, survivors. Maybe they had news, supplies, a plan. They got within 100 yards and I could see them clearly. Man and woman, middle-aged, both tanned and dirty. The man steered while the woman stood at the bow with binoculars pointed at me. "Hello," I shouted. "Do you need? How many on the island?" The woman's voice carried across the water. "Just me. Are you okay? What's happening, and you got supplies?" "Some. Food, water, not much." "Are there other? Radio?" "No, it's dead, just static." "Have you heard anything about?" They were already turning away. The motor revved, and the boat swung east, heading toward a cluster of islands further out. "Wait!" I ran to the end of the dock. "Please! Do you know if is help coming? Are there evacuation?" The boat didn't stop. In 2 minutes, it was just a white speck against the blue water. In 5, it was gone. I sat on the dock until sunset, told myself they were smart to be cautious, to not risk contact, to keep moving. Told myself I'd have done the same. Told myself their boat was probably low on fuel and they couldn't afford to stop. Told myself I wasn't completely alone, even though that's exactly what I was. That night, the dreams started. My apartment building burning, Mrs. Chen's face, the deer thrashing, the swimmers sinking, my sister calling my name from somewhere I couldn't reach. I woke gasping, reaching for the rifle, and it took minutes to remember where I was. The island, safe, isolated, trapped. Day 10, I explored the whole island properly. Every tree, every rock, every possible hiding spot. Found an old fire pit on the west side, half buried, probably from when this place was a Boy Scout camp or something decades ago. Found beer cans in the underbrush, rusty and ancient. Found a rope swing someone had hung from a pine tree overlooking the water. The rope rotted through, and the board long gone. Found evidence of life before, of normal times, of people who came here to have fun and then went home. I sat on the rocks on the east side and watched the mainland through the binoculars. The fires had mostly burned out, but the smoke lingered, a permanent haze. Movement was less now, or maybe just less visible. Sometimes hours would pass without seeing a single figure. Sometimes they clustered together, dozens of them, doing something I couldn't make out at this distance. Once I saw them pull down a person who was running, watched through the scope as they swarmed over the runner, as the struggle stopped, as they fed. Should have looked away. Couldn't. The runner got up after. Took maybe 10 minutes, got up and joined the others and started moving with that same jerky wrongness. I threw the binoculars into the cabin and didn't pick them up for 2 days. Day 12, the solar panels died. Sort of. They still generated power, but not enough to be useful. Clouds rolled in, thick and gray, and the charge controller showed maybe 15% capacity. The phone was at 20% battery. I turned it off to preserve it, even though there was no signal, no apps that worked without internet, no reason to keep it except that it was a connection to before. The laptop had died days ago. I'd been using it to watch downloaded movies at night, ration them out, one every few days as a treat. Gone now. Just darkness after sunset and the sound of rain on the roof. The rain was good though, filled the collection barrel to overflowing. I could stop rationing water, could even wash my hair for the first time since arriving. The outhouse was less horrible in the rain somehow. The smell washed away temporarily. I stood in the downpour in just my boxers and let it soak me, freezing and clean, and laughed because it felt good and because I was definitely losing it. Found a deck of cards in a drawer, water damaged and stuck together but salvageable. I spent an evening carefully separating them, laying them out to dry by the wood stove. 47 cards, missing the 5 of hearts, the jack of diamonds, and the 2 jokers. Close enough. Played solitaire until my eyes hurt. Lost every game. Played anyway. Day 14 I almost left. Woke up and the food situation had gotten bad despite the fish. I'd been eating too much, couldn't help it. And now I was down to maybe 4 days of canned goods. The fishing was inconsistent. Some days I'd catch 3 or 4, some days nothing. The smoked fish I'd made had gone moldy and I'd had to throw it out. Waste of good food, and my stomach was constantly cramped with hunger. The boat had fuel. I could reach the marina in maybe 30 minutes, stock up, get more ammunition, real food, medicine, clothes that didn't smell like smoke and fish and failure. I loaded supplies into the boat. Cans, water, rifle, ammunition, knife, matches in a waterproof bag, untied the mooring line, started the motor. It caught on the third pull, loud and rough, pointed the bow toward the marina, gripped the tiller, throttled up. Got 20 feet from the dock before I killed the engine. The marina would be overrun. If there had been survivors, they'd have left by now or died trying. The infected would have spread through every building, every boat, every place humans used to be. I'd be trapped on the water with limited fuel and nowhere to run if things went wrong. And things always went wrong. I tied the boat back up and carried my supplies back to the cabin and sat on the floor in the dark and told myself I'd made the smart choice. Day 15. I started the garden. Stupid idea, probably. Too late in the season, soil was mostly rock. I had no seeds except some dried beans I was willing to sacrifice and a shriveled potato that had sprouted in the bag. But I needed something to do. Needed to feel like I was planning for a future longer than the next meal. Found a patch of dirt on the south side of the cabin where sun hit for most of the day. Cleared rocks and roots and pine needles. Dug with the hatchet because I didn't have a shovel. Planted the beans and potato pieces and some corn kernels from a can, even though I knew corn didn't work that way. Watered it with lake water, marked it with sticks. Felt ridiculous. Checked it every morning anyway. The routine was everything. Wake at dawn, check the perimeter, catch fish if possible, tend the fire, boil water, eat, work on something, reinforce barricades, gather firewood, improve the shelter, watch the mainland, play cards, read the poetry book I'd been too snobby to read before, sleep, repeat. Some days were harder. Some days I lay in the loft and couldn't find a reason to get up. The sun would be high before I moved, and even then, it was just to piss and drink water and crawl back to bed. On the hard days, I thought about swimming to shore, just walking into the water and not stopping. Let the cold take me before the infected did. Quick, easy, done. I didn't. Don't know why. Stubbornness, maybe? Or cowardice? Or some animal part of my brain that refused to quit even when quitting made sense. Day 18. Something got onto the island. I heard the cans rattle in the night. Sat up fast, rifle already in my hands, heart trying to escape through my throat. Listened. The sound came from the north side, near the dock. Not wind, too deliberate. Footsteps on rock, uneven and dragging. I climbed down from the loft, slow and quiet. The fire had burned down to coals, just enough light to see shadows, and nothing else. I waited by the door, listening. More footsteps, closer. The door rattled. I didn't breathe, scratching on the wood, wet sounds like breathing through fluid. The door rattled again, harder, and the barricade shifted. I raised the rifle, aimed at where the door would open, finger on the trigger. Then nothing. The sound stopped. I waited 5 minutes. 10. Silence except for my pulse and the lake and the wind. At dawn, I opened the door with the rifle ready. The clearing was empty. But at the base of the door, scratches in the wood. Gouges like from fingernails, deep enough to leave splinters. And in the dirt, a footprint. Bare foot, too wide, toes splayed wrong. I followed the prints to the shore. They led into the water and disappeared. No sign of how it had gotten onto the island, no boat, no obvious swim route. Just tracks, and then nothing. I spent the day rebuilding the barricade, triple thick, nailed boards across the door from the inside so nothing could break through. Set up more string perimeter, more cans, covered the whole island in early warning. That night, I didn't sleep. Just sat against the door with the rifle and waited for morning. Day 19, I made a weapon. The hatchet was good but short range. Rifle was running low on ammunition, 16 rounds left. I needed something for close quarters, something I could use again and again. Found a thick branch, pine, solid and heavy. Spent hours stripping bark and shaping one end into a point with my knife. Not a spear, not really, more like a sharp stick, but it was something. Made 2 more. Propped them by the door and the windows. Felt slightly less helpless. Emphasis on slightly. The garden showed green shoots. 4 of the beans had sprouted. The potato pieces showed nothing yet, but I watered them anyway. Talked to them like they were pets. Told them to grow or we'd both starve. Definitely losing it. Day 20. I saw the helicopter. Late afternoon. Sun angling toward the mountains. I was on the dock trying to untangle fishing line when I heard it. The distinctive whoop, whoop, whoop cutting through the constant silence. It came from the south, flying low and fast. Military, I thought. Had to be military. Dark green with numbers stenciled on the side. It passed directly over the island, maybe 500 feet up, and I waved and shouted and jumped like an idiot. It didn't stop. Didn't even slow, just kept going north until it disappeared behind the mountains. But it meant something. Meant there was still organization somewhere, still a government or military or some kind of structure. Meant I wasn't the last person alive. I watched the sky until dark, but it didn't come back. Day 22. The weather turned. The clouds that had been threatening finally opened up, and it rained for 3 days straight. Not normal rain. Sheets of water, wind that bent the trees horizontal, waves on the lake that slammed against the rocky shore hard enough to shake the cabin. I stayed inside, ate cold food because I couldn't risk a fire, listened to the storm, and tried not to think about the roof giving way, or the cabin flooding, or the island itself washing away. The strings I'd set up washed away first, then the fire pit, then part of my obstacle course on the south shore, trees and branches I'd carefully placed just gone, swept into the deep water. On the second day, the dock started to break apart. I watched through the window as the boards splintered and separated, as the metal supports twisted and gave way. By the third day, it was gone, except for a few support posts sticking up out of the water like grave markers. The boat was tied to one of those posts. It swung wildly in the waves, slamming against rocks, taking damage I couldn't prevent. I needed that boat. It was my only way off the island. But going out in this storm would be suicide. I watched it bash itself to pieces and did nothing. When the storm finally cleared, the boat was still floating. Barely. The hull had cracks, the motor was underwater, and half the seats were gone. But it floated. The dock was gone. The perimeter warnings were gone. The obstacle course was gone. My fishing spot was gone. The shallows had been rearranged by the storm, the rocks I'd stood on now somewhere else. I sat in the mud outside the cabin and laughed until I cried. Day 25, I fixed the boat. Sort of. Pulled it onto shore during low water. The lake level had dropped, exposing rocks and mud, and things I didn't want to examine too closely. Turned the boat over. The cracks weren't as bad as I'd thought. Hairline fractures, mostly. Nothing I could really fix without proper supplies, but I tried anyway. Used pine sap heated over a fire as a sealant. Packed it into the cracks, let it harden. Probably wouldn't hold if I actually took the boat out, but it made me feel productive. The motor was fucked, completely submerged, corroded, useless. I had two options: fix it somehow with zero mechanical knowledge, or accept that I was stuck on the island until I could swim to shore. Swimming to shore meant joining them, meant giving up. So I took the motor apart, piece by piece. Laid everything out on a tarp. Looked at parts I didn't recognize, couldn't name, had no idea how to repair. Started cleaning anyway. Used lake water and a rag torn from my spare shirt. Wiped away mud and algae and corrosion. Tried to remember anything I'd learned from YouTube videos about small engines. Remembered nothing useful. Put it back together wrong twice before I got something that looked right. Pulled the starter cord. Nothing. Tried again. Nothing. Adjusted something that might have been the throttle. Pulled again. The motor coughed. Died. I pulled again and it caught. Rough, smoking, running at maybe half power, but running. I let it run for 5 minutes, then killed it to save fuel. Marked it in my log as a victory, small, but real. Day 28. I realized I'd lost weight. My jeans wouldn't stay up anymore. Kept sliding down until I had to tie them with rope. My arms looked thin, ropey with muscle, but no fat left. Ribs visible when I washed in the lake. The fish and canned goods weren't enough. I was burning more calories than I took in. All the work, the stress, the constant low-level fear. I needed more food. There were birds on the island, small ones mostly, chickadees and nuthatches and jays. They landed in the trees around the cabin, hopped through the clearing looking for seeds or bugs or whatever birds ate. I fashioned a snare from fishing line, set it in a spot where I'd seen them land frequently, baited it with crumbs from the last of my crackers, caught nothing for 2 days. Then a chickadee, tiny and furious, tangled in the line and screaming. I'd never heard a chickadee scream before. Didn't know they could. It sounded too human. I killed it quick as I could. Plucked it. Barely any meat. 2 mouthfuls maybe. I ate it anyway, bones and all, because wasting food was a sin now. Set more snares. Caught 2 more birds over the next week. It helped, but not enough. Never enough. Day 30, I saw them on the far shore, dozens of them, clustered around something. I watched through the rifle scope. The binoculars were gone, lost somewhere during the storm. They were tearing apart a building, pulling it down piece by piece. Why? No reason I could understand. Maybe they were looking for food. Maybe they were just compelled to destroy. One of them looked toward the island. I swear it looked right at me, even though there was no way it could see me at this distance. It tilted its head, bird-like, and opened its mouth. I lowered the rifle and went inside. The poetry book was half gone. I'd been using pages to start fires when the kindling was damp. Burning someone else's carefully arranged words for warmth felt appropriate somehow. The poems that were left were the weird ones, abstract stuff about death and nature and the impermanence of things. I read them by firelight and thought they weren't so bad after all. Day 32, the beans were ready. Sort of. 4 plants, scraggly and half dead, but they'd produced maybe 24 edible beans. I picked them carefully, reverently, like they were jewels. Ate them raw because cooking would shrink them, and I wanted to feel like I'd eaten something substantial. They were bland and tough, but they were food I'd grown myself, and that meant something. The potato had rotted. The corn never sprouted. But the beans proved it was possible. Next year, if there was a next year, I could plant more, expand the garden, actually figure out what I was doing. Next year felt like a fantasy, but I planned for it anyway. Day 35, I found the body. Washed up on the west shore, caught between rocks, face down in the shallows, bloated and gray, dressed in a park ranger uniform, or what was left of one. No obvious wounds, maybe drowned, maybe died of something else and then fell in the water. I stood on the rocks above it and tried to decide what to do. Leaving it seemed wrong. Burying it meant touching it, moving it, risking infection if there was even a scratch on my skin. I pried it loose with a long branch and pushed it back into deep water. Watched it sink slowly, arms spreading wide like it was flying. Told myself words I didn't believe about rest and peace and the end of suffering. Washed my hands in the lake for 10 minutes. Washed the branch. Washed the rocks. Probably didn't matter. But I did it anyway. Day 38. I broke a tooth. Eating smoked fish. I'd finally figured out how to do it right, sort of, and bit down on something hard. Bone fragment, probably. The tooth cracked clean through. Top right molar. Pain like electricity shooting through my jaw. No dentist, no painkillers except some ibuprofen in the first aid kit that was probably expired. No options except to deal with it. The ibuprofen helped for a few hours. Then the pain came back, throbbing in time with my pulse. I couldn't eat on that side, couldn't sleep, couldn't think about anything else. Rinsed my mouth with salt water. Used a whole day's worth of precious salt, but the pain eased a little. Did it again every few hours. By day 40, the tooth had settled into a constant dull ache instead of sharp agony. I learned to eat carefully, chew on the left side only, avoid hot and cold. Logged it in the notebook, day 40, tooth broken, managing, food supply, 4 days canned goods, fish variable, snares catching occasionally. Ammunition, 13 rounds. Weather, clear. Mainland activity, minimal. Mental state, questionable. That last part was getting harder to judge. I talk to myself constantly now. Full conversations with imaginary people. My sister, my mom, a girl I dated in college, even Karen from accounting. They talked back with my voice and my thoughts, but I pretended they were real anyway. The isolation was the worst part. Worse than the hunger, worse than the fear. My brain wasn't meant for this. None of our brains were. We're social animals, pack creatures, and I'd been alone on this island for over a month. I started talking to the trees, named them. The big pine near the cabin was Frank. The scraggly one on the east side was Barbara. The fallen tree I used for the obstacle course was Steve. Frank was a good listener. Barbara complained a lot. Steve didn't say much, but he was reliable. Yeah, definitely losing it. Day 42, I heard voices. Real ones, I thought. From across the water. Faint, but definitely human. I grabbed the rifle and ran to the south shore. Scanned the mainland, looking for the source. There, on the beach. 3 people, alive and moving normally. They had a cart, were loading something into it. One of them was gesturing, pointing up the road toward town. I cupped my hands around my mouth and shouted, "Hey, over here!" They stopped, looked around. One pointed toward the island. "I'm here, on the island, I'm alive!" They looked at each other, seemed to argue. Then they grabbed their cart and ran, disappeared into the tree line, and were gone. I shouted until my throat was raw. They didn't come back. Maybe they thought I was infected. Maybe they didn't want to share resources. Maybe they were right not to trust a wild-looking man screaming from an island. I went back to the cabin and didn't talk to anyone, real or imaginary, for the rest of the day. Day 45, the rain came back. Not as bad as the storm, but steady, cold, autumnal. The temperature dropped. I'd been avoiding using the wood stove to preserve firewood, but now I had no choice. Burned through 3 days worth of wood in one night just to keep from freezing. Started rationing heat like I rationed food, fire only in the evenings. During the day, I wore every piece of clothing I had and huddled under the sleeping bag and shivered. Gathered more firewood, but everything was wet. Took twice as long to get a fire started, burned poorly, produced more smoke than heat. My eyes watered constantly from the smoke. My lungs ached. The cabin leaked, not badly, but enough that puddles formed in the corners. My spare clothes were damp. The notebook pages started to curl and the ink ran. I moved everything to the loft where it was drier, hung wet clothes from the rafters, tried to create some kind of system. Day 48. I caught nothing. No fish, no birds in the snares, my last can of soup for dinner. Tomorrow I'd be dependent entirely on what I could catch. Tried fishing until my hands were numb. Nothing, not even a nibble. The fish had gone deep with the cold water, maybe. Or they were gone. Or I'd somehow fished out the immediate area, set more snares, checked them every hour. Nothing. Went to bed hungry and woke up hungrier. Day 49, I caught a snake, not intentionally. I was gathering wood from the east side of the island when I lifted a log, and there it was, small, brown, coiled and hissing. Garter snake, harmless, but I didn't care about harm. I cared about protein. Caught it behind the head like I'd seen on TV. It wrapped around my arm, squirming and panicking. I carried it back to the cabin before I could think too hard about what I was doing. Killed it, skinned it. The meat was pale and stringy. I cooked it over the fire until it was charred and ate every piece. Tasted like chicken, supposedly, but I couldn't remember what chicken tasted like, so I had nothing to compare it to. My stomach hurt after, but I kept it down. Food was food. Started actively hunting for more snakes. Found 2 over the next week. They helped, but I couldn't rely on them. Too cold now. They were going dormant. Day 53, the ice started forming, just at the edges first, in the calm shallows. Thin sheets that broke when touched, but it meant winter was coming, real winter, and I wasn't ready. I didn't have enough wood, didn't have warm enough clothes, didn't have enough food to make it through months of cold and snow. The boat was my only option. I had to leave before the lake froze, had to try for the mainland, stock up, find better shelter maybe. The island wouldn't sustain me through winter, but the mainland was where they were, where thousands of infected roamed, where every building was a potential death trap, where one mistake meant joining them. I sat by the fire and tried to make the math work. Tried to find an option that didn't end in death or undeath. Couldn't find one. Day 55, I made my decision. Spent the day preparing. Loaded the boat with essential supplies, rifle, ammunition, down to 11 rounds, knife, hatchet, matches, water bottles, tarp, fishing gear, first aid kit. Left the rest in the cabin. If I didn't come back, at least the island would be stocked for whoever came next, if anyone came next. Wrote a note in the notebook. To whoever finds this, supplies in the cabin, water collection barrel outside, fish in the shallows, garden south side. Watch the south shore. They can swim, stay quiet, stay hidden, stay alive. Left the notebook open on the table where it would be visible. At dawn, on day 56, I pushed the boat into the water. The motor started on the first pull. Miracle. I turned it toward the marina, toward the mainland, toward everything I'd been hiding from. The island grew smaller behind me, the trees, the cabin, the rocky shores where I'd spent almost 2 months surviving. It looked peaceful from this distance. Safe. I wanted to turn back. I kept going. The marina came into view. Boats at odd angles, some sunk, some burned. The dock was damaged but intact enough to tie up. Buildings behind it, harbor master's office, general store, restaurant, all with doors hanging open and windows smashed. No movement visible. No sounds except the water and the motor and my breathing. I killed the motor 50 yards out and drifted in, listening. Silence. Maybe they'd all moved on, migrated south, or found better hunting grounds, or just wandered away. Or maybe they were waiting. The boat bumped against the dock. I tied up with shaking hands, grabbed the rifle, stepped onto the dock with the wood creaking under my weight, sound too loud, announcing my presence. Nothing happened. I moved toward the buildings, rifle up, finger on the trigger. The harbor master's office first. Door open, darkness inside. I cleared the doorway, moved inside quick. Blood. Lots of it. Dried and brown on the walls and floor. Drag marks leading toward the back room. I didn't follow them. Desk drawers still had supplies. Flashlight with dead batteries, duct tape, map of the lake. Flares. I took everything. The general store was worse. The smell hit me from 20 feet away. Rot and shit, and something sweet underneath. Bodies inside, or pieces of bodies. The shelves were mostly empty, but I found canned food in a supply closet, overlooked or forgotten. 12 cans. Jackpot. I loaded them into a backpack I'd found, kept moving, needed more, needed ammunition, needed warmer clothes, needed medicine. That's when I heard the sound, from behind the restaurant. Shuffling footsteps, wet breathing. I turned fast, rifle up. Came around the corner, just one. Female, maybe, hard to tell with the decay, wearing what used to be a waitress uniform. It saw me and made that sound, cough, wheeze, moan, and started forward. I backed toward the dock, didn't want to shoot, didn't want to waste ammunition or make noise. But it was fast, faster than the swimmers had been. It closed the distance in seconds. I fired. The shot went wide, chambered another round. It lunged. I caught it with the rifle barrel, shoved it back. It stumbled but didn't fall. Grabbed the rifle. We struggled, this thing and me, pulling the gun back and forth. Its hands were cold. Its breath was poison. Its eyes were white and empty. I let go of the rifle and drew my knife, shoved it up under what was left of the jaw, into the brain. The body spasmed and went limp. I yanked the knife free and the thing collapsed. I stood over it, breathing hard, covered in black blood that smelled like death. More sounds, from the town, from the buildings. They'd heard the shot. They were coming. I grabbed the rifle and ran for the boat, threw the backpack in, untied the line, pulled the starter cord. The motor didn't catch, pulled again. Nothing. Again. It coughed and died. They were visible now. Coming down the street, out of buildings, a dozen at least. Shambling and running and making those sounds. I pulled the cord again. The motor caught. I throttled up and the boat jerked away from the dock, out into open water, spray hitting my face. The infected reached the dock. Some jumped in the water after me. They sank immediately. These ones couldn't swim, too far gone maybe, but others just stood there, reaching, making their sounds. I kept the throttle open until I was half a mile out. Then I killed the motor and drifted and shook so hard I thought I'd fall out of the boat. I'd gotten supplies, 12 cans of food, duct tape, flares, a backpack, had lost my calm, my safety, my clean knife. And I knew I couldn't go back. The town was too dangerous. The marina was compromised. I was stuck on the island until spring, maybe longer. I turned the boat toward that tiny speck of safety in the middle of the lake and headed home. The island looked different when I got back. Smaller, more vulnerable. The trees seemed thinner, the cabin more exposed. I pulled the boat onto shore and carried my supplies up the hill. The notebook was where I'd left it. The cabin was cold but intact. Nothing had changed except me. Day 56, I wrote. Went to mainland. Supplies acquired. 1 infected killed. Cannot return. Will attempt to survive winter on island. God help me. I didn't believe in God, but I wrote it anyway. The next days blurred together. Preparing for winter became everything. I gathered firewood obsessively, stacking it under the lean-to I'd built against the cabin, reinforced the walls with mud and moss for insulation, covered the windows with more boards, leaving just small gaps for light and observation. The fishing got worse. Some days I caught nothing. Some days a single small perch that barely counted as a meal. I checked the snares constantly, but the birds had learned, had figured out that the clearing was dangerous. I started rationing the 12 cans from the marina, 1 can every 3 days. On the days between whatever I could catch, my belt now had an extra hole I'd cut with the knife, and that hole was too big. Day 60, the first real snow fell. Not much, just a dusting that melted by afternoon, but it meant time was running out. Soon the lake would freeze, and I'd be truly trapped. Couldn't fish through ice without proper equipment, couldn't leave, couldn't do anything but burn firewood and wait. I spent that day checking and rechecking my supplies. 6 cans left. Maybe 2 weeks of wood if I burned it sparingly. The rifle was down to 8 rounds. The first aid kit was mostly empty. I'd used the bandages on various cuts and scrapes, the ibuprofen on my tooth, the antiseptic on the knife wound I'd gotten killing the infected. The numbers didn't add up. I wasn't going to make it. I sat in the cabin and tried to think of solutions. Could I build a better shelter, trap larger game, find a way to generate more heat? Every option seemed impossible without resources I didn't have. The trees swayed outside, Frank and Barbara and Steve bending in the wind. I'd stopped talking to them days ago. It had been comforting when I was just lonely. Now it felt like evidence of how far gone I was. Day 63, I saw lights on the mainland. Deep in the night. Couldn't sleep because of the cold. I was watching the shore out of habit when they appeared. Flashlights, I thought, or lanterns. Moving through the trees, disappearing and reappearing. Survivors. Had to be. The infected didn't use lights. I grabbed the flashlight I'd gotten from the marina and went outside. The batteries were dead, but I'd found replacements in a kitchen drawer. I pointed it toward the lights and turned it on, off, on, off, on, off. SOS. The universal distress signal. The lights on the mainland stopped moving. I repeated the signal. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, over and over until my hand cramped. One of the mainland lights blinked back. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. They'd seen me. They knew I was here. I kept signaling, tried to convey urgency, desperation. Please help me. Don't know if any of that came through. The mainland lights blinked once more, then went out. Just darkness again. I stood in the cold for an hour, signaling, hoping, but they didn't come back. Maybe they were coming by boat. Maybe they were planning a rescue. Maybe they just wanted me to know I wasn't alone. Or maybe they decided I wasn't worth the risk. I went back inside and waited for dawn. No boats came. Day 65, I killed Frank, the pine tree next to the cabin. Needed the wood more than I needed the sentimental attachment. I took the hatchet and swung until my shoulders screamed and my hands bled, and the tree finally fell. It took the whole day to process it into firewood, cut the branches, stack them to dry, cut the trunk into logs, split the logs with the hatchet and wedges I'd carved from other wood. By dark, I had maybe 10 days worth of fuel. Barbara and Steve watched. I didn't apologize. Started eyeing Barbara. She was smaller, would be easier to take down, would buy me another week. Day 67, the lake froze. Not solid yet. Just ice along the shores, maybe 20 feet out, with open water in the middle. The boat was already frozen in, locked in place by ice that got thicker every night. Broke it free with the hatchet. Pulled the boat higher onto shore. If I needed to leave before spring, I'd have to find another way. Walk across the ice maybe if it got thick enough. But that wouldn't be for weeks, maybe months. Effectively, I was locked on the island now. No escape except what I could create. The math was simple and terrible. 6 cans of food, maybe 3 weeks of firewood if I burned Barbara. No reliable source of protein. Winter was just starting. I wasn't going to make it to spring. Day 70, I accepted it. Sat by the fire and looked at the rifle. 8 rounds. 1 would be enough. Quick. Certain. Better than starving or freezing or eventually getting so desperate I tried to walk across thin ice. I picked up the rifle, checked the chamber, loaded, safety off, put the barrel under my chin and felt the cold metal against my skin. Thought about my sister, my mom, my dad who died when I was 12. Wondered if there was anything after or if this was just the end. Thought about Mrs. Chen and her rhinestone leash. The runner on the mainland getting pulled down, the deer thrashing, everyone who'd already died, everyone who was dying now, everyone who'd die before this was over. My finger was on the trigger. Then I heard the motor. Faint, distant, but definitely a motor. I pulled the rifle away from my chin, moved to the window, a boat on the lake, cutting through the ice, heading toward the island. The lights from the mainland. They'd come. I grabbed the flashlight and ran outside, signaling. The boat adjusted course, headed straight for my shore. 2 people visible. They wore heavy coats and had rifles slung over their shoulders. The boat cut through the ice along my shore and stopped 20 feet out, as close as they could get without beaching. One of them stood up, cupped their hands around their mouth. "You alone?" "Yes." "Just me." My voice cracked from disuse. "Anyone infected on the island?" "No, it's clear." They looked at each other, had a conversation I couldn't hear. Then the one who'd spoken pointed to the shore. "We're not coming onto the island. You want out? You walk across the ice. Bring only what you can carry." "Wait, you're leaving? Where are you?" "North Camp, 3 miles up the lake. We've got shelter, food, supplies, about 40 people. But we can't risk bringing in someone who might be infected. You walk to us, we'll watch. Anyone showing symptoms gets shot. Understood?" "Yes. Yes, I understand. Thank you." "Move fast. Ice won't hold much longer today." The boat idled while I ran back to the cabin, grabbed the backpack, loaded it with everything essential. The rifle, ammunition, knife, hatchet, first aid kit, extra clothes. The notebook. Left the canned food. They'd have food. Left the sleeping bag. Too bulky. At the door I stopped. Looked at the cabin one last time. I'd survived here for 70 days. It had kept me alive when everything else was trying to kill me. "Thank you," I told it. Felt stupid. Said it anyway. The ice was thin, but held my weight. I walked carefully, testing each step, moving toward the boat. The 2 people watched me the whole time, rifles ready. If I'd shown any sign of infection, they'd have shot me without hesitation. I made it halfway. Then I heard the crack. The ice beneath my right foot gave way. I fell through up to my knee into water so cold it felt like fire. Scrambled back onto solid ice, now soaked and freezing. "Keep moving!" the person in the boat shouted. I moved, crawled when walking felt too risky. The wet clothes were already freezing, stiff and heavy. My leg burned and then went numb. I kept going, reached the boat. Hands grabbed me, pulled me in. I collapsed in the bottom, shaking so hard my teeth rattled. Someone threw a blanket over me. The boat turned, heading north. "What's your name?" the person who'd spoken asked. Female voice, middle-aged, calm. "Jake," I managed through chattering teeth. "Jake Matthews." "I'm Sarah. That's Tom." "Welcome to the apocalypse, Jake. Let's get you to camp before you freeze to death." The boat cut through ice and open water. I watched the island recede behind us, getting smaller, disappearing into the gray distance. 2 months of my life, 2 months of survival. I'd made it. The North Camp was exactly what Sarah had described, a cluster of cabins on a larger island, maybe 20 acres. Smoke rose from multiple fires. People moved between buildings, working, organized. They'd built a wall of sorts from logs and debris with lookouts posted. They had a quarantine protocol. I spent 3 days in a small cabin by myself, under observation. Someone brought food twice a day, real food, hot soup and bread, and even coffee. They checked me for bites, scratches, fever, watched for any sign of infection. On the 4th day, Sarah came in and declared me clean. "Welcome to the community," she said. "You're going to earn your keep, but you'll eat and you'll have shelter and you'll have people to watch your back. Sound good?" "Sounds perfect," I said. She showed me around. They had 43 people total, a mix of ages and backgrounds. They'd organized into work groups: fishing, hunting, security, maintenance, medical. They had a solar array and a wind turbine, a greenhouse built from salvaged windows, gardens being prepared for spring. They'd been building this since the first week of the outbreak. Sarah and Tom and a few others had seen what was coming, had grabbed supplies and people and run before the cities burned. They'd made mistakes, lost people, learned hard lessons, but they'd survived. And now, I was part of it. They gave me a bed in a bunkhouse, shared with 5 other men, gave me work assignments. I'd rotate through fishing, maintenance, and firewood detail. Gave me a community, something I'd forgotten existed. That first night around the communal fire, 43 survivors eating together, talking, laughing even. I started crying and couldn't stop. Someone, older woman named Alice, put her arm around me and just held me until I was done. "First time being around people?" she asked. 70 days alone," I said. "You did good. You survived. That's all that matters now." I wanted to believe her, wanted to believe survival was enough. But I kept thinking about the island, about the cabin, about those 70 days of isolation and fear and slowly starving. Kept thinking about how close I'd come to putting the rifle under my chin. Kept thinking about everyone who hadn't made it. Mrs. Chen, the runner, the park ranger, the people in the marina, thousands, millions who died or become something worse than dead. Sarah sat down next to me, handed me a cup of something hot. "We lost people getting here," she said quietly. "Tom lost his wife. Alice lost her daughter. Everyone here has lost someone. Everyone here has trauma. But we're building something. A future, maybe. Or at least a present that doesn't involve dying alone and afraid." "What happens when winter's over?" I asked. "What happens when supplies run out or they figure out how to cross the ice or..." "We'll handle it. Together. That's the only way any of us make it." I drank the hot liquid. Tea, I realized. Actual tea with honey. Luxury beyond measure. Watched the fire and the people around it and tried to let myself hope. Day 71, I wrote in the notebook that night. Made it to camp. 43 survivors. I'm not alone anymore. Don't know what happens next. But I'm alive, and that has to count for something. The next morning, I woke to sunlight and the sound of people talking, working, living. Tom assigned me to the fishing detail. Turned out my hours of fumbling with a rod on the island had taught me something useful. I spent the day on the ice with 3 others, drilling holes, setting lines, actually catching fish. We caught enough for everyone to eat that night. My contribution, small but real. That evening, someone played guitar by the fire. Old songs, pre-apocalypse songs. People sang along, and for a few minutes it felt almost normal. I didn't sing, just listened. Let the music and the company wash over me. On day 74, a boat arrived from another survivor group, 20 miles south. They wanted to trade. They had ammunition and medicine, wanted food and information. Sarah negotiated while Tom and others stood guard. The trade went smoothly. We got 30 rounds of rifle ammunition and a full first aid kit. They got smoked fish and details about the conditions up north. Everyone stayed polite, careful, wary of each other, but not hostile. They left, and Sarah called a meeting. More groups like ours exist, she said. We've made contact with 5 others. They're scattered around the lake, up in the mountains, wherever people could find isolation and resources. We're not rebuilding civilization, but we're not extinct either. We're adapting. What about the cities? Someone asked. What about rescue? Cities are gone. Government's gone, far as we can tell. We saw that helicopter weeks back, nothing since. We're on our own. The sooner everyone accepts that, the better. So what's the plan? Survive winter. Expand the gardens in spring. Maybe contact more groups, set up trade routes. Build something sustainable. It won't be what we had before, but it'll be something. I thought about my island, my isolation, my desperation. Thought about the choice I'd almost made with the rifle. This was better. Hard, scary, uncertain, but better. Day 80, I went back to the island. Tom needed someone to scout it for supplies I might have left behind. Anything useful. Tools, food, materials. I volunteered. We took the boat down at dawn. The ice was thicker now, but the channels were still navigable. The island looked smaller than I remembered. The cabin looked sad, abandoned. Tom waited in the boat while I went ashore. Everything was how I'd left it. The cans in the cupboard, the sleeping bag, the wood stove, the notebook on the table still open to my last entry. I gathered what was useful. The cans, the sleeping bag, some spare clothes, a pot. Saw the garden patch, buried now under snow. Wondered if the beans would come back in spring or if they were dead. Saw the trees, Barbara and Steve still standing, Frank's stump. Thank you, I told them again. Still felt stupid. Still meant it. Tom shouted from the boat, "We need to move. Weather's coming in." I took one last look at the cabin, the island that had kept me alive when I'd had nothing else. Then I walked away. On the boat ride back, Tom asked, "What was it like, being alone that long?" "Quiet," I said. "Too quiet. Your brain does weird things when there's no one to talk to, no one to keep you grounded. I started naming trees, talking to them like they were people." He laughed. "I would have gone crazy week 1. I did go crazy. Just happened slowly so I didn't notice. We got back to camp as the snow started falling. Heavy, thick flakes that meant we'd be stuck inside for days. But the camp was ready, supplies stocked, fires built up, everyone accounted for. That night, 43 people sheltered together while the storm raged outside. We ate fish stew and bread, played cards, told stories about our lives before. Alice had been a teacher. Tom had worked construction. Sarah had been a park ranger, ironic given the body I'd found. Someone asked me to tell them about the island, about surviving alone. They wanted to know tricks, strategies, anything that might help if they ended up isolated. I told them everything, the fishing, the snares, the garden, the boat repair, the rationing. Told them about the swimmers and the storm and the close calls. Told them about the tooth and the hunger and the cold. Didn't tell them about the rifle under my chin. Some things weren't for sharing. "You did good," Sarah said when I was done. 70 days alone and you stayed human. That's harder than it sounds. Barely, I admitted. I was talking to trees. Trees are good listeners. Everyone laughed and the conversation moved on. But later, Alice came up to me privately. "I know what you're not saying," she said quietly. "About how close you came. We all have those moments. Days where keeping going feels impossible. You made the right choice. How do you know? Because you're here. Because you're helping. Because you're not giving up. That's all any of us can do." She walked away, and I sat by the fire and watched the snow fall outside and thought about choices and chances and the random luck that had put me on an island instead of in a city when everything fell apart. Day 90, the weather cleared. We started ice fishing in earnest, bringing in enough to smoke and store for the rest of winter. I was good at it now, could read the ice, knew where fish congregated, could set lines efficiently. Day 100, we had a wedding. 2 people who'd met in the camp who decided that even in the apocalypse, especially in the apocalypse, they wanted to make a commitment. Sarah officiated. We all celebrated. Someone had saved a bottle of whiskey. We passed it around and toasted to life and love and survival. Day 110. Tom and I went hunting, snowshoes cobbled together from wood and cord, rifles slung over our shoulders. We tracked deer through the forest on the big island, moving quiet, patient. Got one. Clean shot. We dressed it in the field and brought it back. Enough meat for everyone to eat well for 3 days. My first big game kill. That night, we feasted. Roasted venison, potatoes from the stored supplies, even some carrots from the greenhouse. It felt like Thanksgiving, like a celebration of plenty in the middle of scarcity. Day 120. I started teaching fishing classes. Others wanted to learn. I showed them everything I'd figured out through trial and error. The best lures, how to read the water, where fish hid, how to set up tip-ups for ice fishing. Felt good to pass on knowledge. Felt like I was contributing something more than just labor. Day 135. We made contact with a group on the east side of the lake. 20 people, good supplies, interested in trade and cooperation. Sarah and Tom went to meet them. Came back with news of other groups, other survivors, a network forming. There might be 1,000 people around this lake, Sarah said. Maybe more. All doing what we're doing, surviving, building, connecting. We're not alone. Day 150, the ice started breaking up. Spring thaw coming early. We'd made it through winter. We'd lost one person, older man who'd had a heart attack in his sleep. We'd had 2 births, pregnancies that predated the apocalypse, resulting in 2 new humans who'd never known the world before. We'd survived. Day 160. I went back to the island one more time. Alone this time. The ice was breaking up but still navigable in the boat. I picked my way through floes, reached the shore. The cabin was still standing. The garden patch showed green shoots. The beans had come back. Wild now, escaped from cultivation, but alive. Barbara and Steve were in bloom, spring growth budding on the branches. I sat on the rock where I'd sat so many times, watching the mainland, and thought about the person I'd been when I arrived here. Scared, alone, desperate, out of options. I'd survived. I'd adapted. I'd made it. The island had saved me, given me time, space, safety when the world was ending. It had been prison and sanctuary both. Had nearly killed me and kept me alive. Thank you, I said one more time to the trees, to the rocks, to the cabin, to the island itself. Then I got back in the boat and headed toward the camp, toward people, toward whatever future we could build together. The island grew smaller behind me, and this time I didn't look back. Day 170, we planted the spring gardens, 30 people working together, turning soil, planting seeds we'd saved and scavenged, beans and potatoes and corn and carrots and tomatoes. Maybe a third would grow, maybe half. But we'd try. Day 180. Another group joined us, 15 people from the mainland who'd been holding out in a fortified warehouse. They'd run out of food, ran out of options, made the dangerous trip across still thin ice and open water to reach us. We took them in, fed them, put them to work. The camp swelled to 58 people. Day 200, we saw the infected swimming again. Not toward us. They were following some instinct or compulsion, migrating maybe. We watched from the island and counted. Hundreds, maybe thousands, all moving north, away from us. The South is truly dead, Sarah said. Everything that could die has died. They're looking for new feeding grounds. What do we do if they come back? We'll handle it. Together. Day 220 in the gardens started producing. Small harvests at first. A few tomatoes, some lettuce. But proof the system worked. Day 250, we had enough surplus to trade. Sent a boat to the eastern group with smoked fish and vegetables. They sent back ammunition and medical supplies and news of other survivors further up the lake chain. Day 275. I stopped counting days. Just lived instead. Fished, worked, ate, slept, talked, laughed, grieved, hoped. same as everyone else, one day at a time. The island was part of my past now, part of my story. The place where I'd learned that survival wasn't just about staying alive, it was about finding reasons to stay alive. The camp became home. The people became family. The work became purpose. We weren't building back what we'd lost. That world was gone. But we were building something new, something different, something that might last. I wrote all of this in the notebook, the one I'd started on the island, filled it completely, started a second one, kept writing because it helped to remember, to process, to document. Maybe someday someone would read it, maybe not. Either way, the act of recording it meant something, meant this had happened, meant I had survived, meant we were still here, still human, still trying. 1 year after I bought the island, funny how that timing worked out. We had a community meeting. Sarah called everyone together. "We've made it a year," she said. 68 of us now. We've survived winter. We've built shelters and gardens. We've established trade with 6 other groups. We've created something sustainable. I think we can call this more than survival now. I think we can call it living. People cheered. I cheered with them. That night around the fire, someone asked me about the island again. New people who hadn't heard the story. I told it differently this time. Less about the isolation and fear. More about what I'd learned. The island taught me that humans can adapt to anything, I said. That we're tougher than we think. That survival is mostly about making choices, small ones, every day to keep going. And that being alone might keep you alive, but being together keeps you human. Alice squeezed my shoulder. Tom raised his cup. Sarah smiled. We sat around the fire as the stars came out, 68 survivors in a dead world, and somehow it felt like hope. The next morning I got up and went to work and lived another day, and another, and another. The island was still out there, empty again, waiting for whoever might need it next. The cabin stood, the trees grew, the beans came back wild every spring, and I was here, part of something bigger, something that might actually last. I'd moved to a small lake island to survive the zombie apocalypse. I'd survived. And then I'd learned to live.